everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I am extremely excited to share with all of you my first impressions of the Pat McGrath Huetopian Dream Mothership 9 palette. So I know at the beginning of all my videos, I say I'm excited to share with all of you some sort of product, but this is seriously the makeup release that I have been most excited about this entire year. So if you guys are new to my channel, I am a huge Pat McGrath fan, and I own all of her other Mothership palettes and a bunch of her other palettes as well. Pat McGrath is the one brand where when she has a new release, I am definitely picking it up. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with all of you swatches, a demo of all the shades, and my initial impression of this palette. You might have noticed down below that I put that this is part 1. So it's actually nighttime where I live. This guy took a little while to get to me in the mail. And so I'm actually gonna film a second video with this tomorrow because I wanted to show you guys both how these shades perform dry and also how they perform with mixing liquid. So I didn't pick up the Intensifies Eye Wand that Pat McGrath came out with this palette, but I recently did pick up a huge bottle of mixing liquid, which I think is basically the same thing. So in that second video, I'll demo it with mixing liquid. Also, because I have so many other Pat McGrath palettes, I want to do a ton of comparison swatches with this palette. So I don't want today's video to be like an hour long, so definitely subscribe down below if you're interested in the second video, which will feature tons of comparison swatches with all of my other Pat McGrath palettes. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. So before we dive into the swatches today, I did want to first just address the controversy that came with the launch of this palette. So this beauty was a very highly anticipated palette because it's been a while since we've had a Mothership palette. And so people were really waiting around to see when the next Mothership would come along. And Pat McGrath actually started teasing this palette on July 2nd, even though it wasn't released until August 12th. So in the interim, there were a lot of Instagram posts, people were getting super excited, and then expectations didn't quite meet reality. So in particular, I'll put up some posts up here, but basically a lot of her Instagram posts were extremely colorful. There were a lot of pastel tones, a lot of rainbows, a lot of shifting shades. So people, myself included, were really expecting that they would see a lot of rainbow colors or pastel shades, a lot of multi-chromes. So based on those posts, it did seem like we were gonna see something that was really exciting. And so not to knock this palette, but of course, looking at it now in all of its beauty, it is not exactly the pastel, rainbow, multi-chrome fiesta that everyone was expecting. It's definitely much more of a Divine Rose 3. So if you guys have watched my Pat McGrath rankings video, you know that I love Divine Rose 1 and Divine Rose 2. So the idea of Divine Rose 3 does not bother me at all. I am very excited about this palette and for this to be a Divine Rose 3. But I will say, when I first saw this palette, my heart actually dropped because I had been religiously following Pat McGrath's Instagram posts for, at that point, basically an entire month in order to see what this new release would be. And recently I have been really into more pastel and more rainbow colored looks. And so I recently picked up Circo Loco and Trio Chrome from Natasha Denona. And so when I saw her teasers, I thought, wow, this is gonna be my perfect palette. It's gonna have those pastel tones I've been really interested in lately. It's gonna have a bunch of multi-chromes. And so when I saw this, I was like, wait, where did all the color go? I mean, it's a beautiful palette, but I do wish that she had done the teasing for this palette a little bit differently. Because if she, for example, had teased it with roses or other sorts of things in that category, I think people would have naturally in their head thought, okay, this is Divine Rose 3, so don't expect anything completely different than what Pat McGrath has done in the past. And also for me personally, I thought that there was gonna be a lot more purple in this and maybe some pastel blues. And so we see a little bit of the purple and a little bit of the blue in this one shade over here, but by and large, I would say if you take out these two shades at the end, the rest of this looks very similar to the other two Divine Rose palettes. And so I just wanted to call that out at the top to just lay out any biases I might have going into this review. I feel very conflicted about this palette because on the one hand, this palette broke my heart the moment I saw it. But on the other hand, in the weeks since she revealed the palette, I've been really falling in love with this palette in its own right. I think it's a really gorgeous palette if you just don't think about the teasers, don't think about the expectations you had, and just look at this palette for what it is. But I did want to just say that because I think a lot of folks on YouTube have been sort of poo-pooing the concerns that people had. I've heard a lot of folks say, well, what did you expect? Like, Pat McGrath is not going to do something super, super colorful. She needs to cater to folks who don't own any Pat McGrath palettes. And other folks have also said, well, you know, it's a pink palette and there's a lot of pink in her teasers. But again, just putting some of the teasers up here, I would say that even though this is kind of a pinky palette, it isn't necessarily the sort of very vibrant, either pastel or neon or rainbow types of tones that were expressed in the teasers. So yes, there was a lot of pink in the teasers, but this is honestly much more of a rose-toned, almost kind of peachy mauvey hued palette rather than a bright pink palette. So I just wanted to say that because I think Divine Rose 2 is much more of a bright pink palette in comparison to this guy. So now that I have said my piece, let's get into swatches of this palette. So first off, let's just take a moment to admire this beautiful untouched palette. So going left to right, top to bottom, here are the first 4 shades. First we have Skin Show Nude Ecstasy. And I wasn't able to find official shade descriptions, so I'll just do my best to describe this for you guys. So this is a beautiful platinum champagne shade. Comes across pretty white on my skin. Next, we have Secret Eden. And so this is a pretty light mid-toned mauvey pink shade. And then we have Bronze Desire. And this is a really super creamy metallic shade. And this is a gorgeous burgundy bronze shade. And then we have Bronze Solaris 005. So this reminds me a lot of the bronze shade in Sublime in terms of its texture and formulation. Dry, it's a little bit more like a glitter topper in consistency, but my guess is that this will look really beautiful with some mixing liquid. So this is a pretty standard orangey golden bronze shade. So here we have the next 4 shades. And let me just say, Astral Venusian Orchid is already putting on a party. So here's Astral Venusian Orchid. This is a really flaky shade, but it's so incredibly beautiful. This is, I think, potentially gonna be one of my favorite Pat McGrath shades, just saying. The base is a little bit lavender purple in tone, and then it has a beautiful golden to green shifting glitter in it. So Kinky Sweat described this as being similar to VR Fire Opal, except with more of a purpley base. Next up, we have Extreme Plum Noir, and these mattes are taking a little bit of building up, but this is a pretty cool tone brownish plummy shade with a bit of mauve as well. Next, we have Cosmic Bloom, and this is a coral rose shade with a pinky bronze shimmer. Next, we have Shockwave, which is a really hot pink, vibrant coral shade. I'm super excited for this one. I feel like this one will bring the party to the lids. And here we have the last 2 shades, which are definitely the 2 shades I was most excited about in this release. So first we have Blitz Sextreme, which I think goes from a burgundy shade to a gold bronzy shade to a dark green shade. And wow, look at that shift. Okay, that's really pretty. And this is definitely more metallic and high shine in comparison to Sextraterrestrial. It has a lot more opacity based on that initial swatch. And finally, we have Astral Amethyst Moon. Okay, that needs a little bit of building up. So this one definitely has more of a glitter topper type of texture, but with a few layers, it almost kind of melts together. But this shade has a beautiful shift from a pink fuchsia purple to a periwinkle blue. So here we have the full palette in all its glory. And I must say, I am very glad I did that little rant before I swatched these, because these are so incredibly beautiful. I feel like this has a really good chance of becoming my favorite Pat McGrath palette, and that would make it my favorite eyeshadow palette. So, I mean, not to get ahead of ourselves, I obviously need to see how these perform on the lids, but this is such a gorgeous palette. So, so, so beautiful. So without further ado, let's get these shadows on my lids. So to start things off, as always, I'm going in with my Wayne Goss number 16 brush into the Secret Eden shade. And I have primed my lids. Okay, this is blending on super, super easily, as I would expect with Pat McGrath shadows. Very, very pretty, very blendable. Perfect for a light transition shade. This shade seems a bit like a warmer version of Veloria. So Veloria is a really nice transition shade with a light mauvey cool toned undertone to it, and this is just like a warmer, more pinky version of that. Alrighty, that was super quick and easy. So now with that same brush, I'm gonna go into Shockwave just because I wanna add some more interest to this look. And I'm gonna keep this more on the outer portion of the lids. Okay, and this is applying really nicely as well. So far, no problem, which I would not expect from these mid-tone shades from Pat McGrath. They generally perform beautifully without any sort of issues. And this is the shade that really reminded me of Naked Blush from Divine Rose 2 when I first saw it, because it has that vibrancy to it, but it's in that same sort of mid-tone shade category. Looking at it on the lids, this definitely has a little bit more pink to it and a bit more coral in comparison to Naked Blush, but they're definitely similar in terms of the kind of use cases you would have for them. Alrighty, and I want to bring back a little bit more of that Secret Eden shade, so I'm just gonna sweep some more of that on my Sonia G crease brush, and I'm gonna take that on the inner third, and then just make sure the blend is seamless. Now taking my Wayne Goss number 16 brush, let's try out this deepest shade, Extreme Plum Noir. To be honest, this is the shade I'm worried about the most because I worry it just won't bring enough depth to the party. I'm sure this will apply easily given that it's not actually that deep. Okay, so far so good. So far these mattes are very consistent with other Pat McGrath palettes. I know there's some speculation as to whether she might use the formula that she introduced in her Eternal Eden quad, and that's a very different matte formula, but this is just her normal powder matte formula. Okay, I will say if you build this up a decent amount, it's actually giving me a lot more opacity than I thought it would, so that's good. Although, as it's getting deeper, it's also getting a little bit trickier to blend out, so maybe I should have been a little bit slower in how I built this up. But I am glad that you are able to build this shade up because otherwise this palette would not have a ton of dimension. Okay, now with my crease brush from Sonia G, I'm just gonna bring back a little bit more of that Shockwave shade because I think the vibrancy of that got covered up a little bit by Extreme Plum Noir. Alright, so far this look is coming together super, super easily. So now is kind of the tricky part because I want to use all of these shades on my lids, but I still want to be able to see the flip of this guy. I think in tomorrow's look, I'm just going to use this as an eyeliner, so this won't feature as prominently in the look. So for today, I'm going to take this on my finger and then put this on the outer portion of this lid because I want to make sure that you can actually see the flip on my lids, and I don't have super big eyelids, so we gotta use the real estate we have available. That is really pretty though. I was worried about the shade, honestly. I was worried it was gonna be too dark and not that different from Sextraterrestrial, and to be fair, I don't think it's that different from Sextraterrestrial, but it's different enough, I think, in my book. And it might be dark, but at least the flip is pretty prominent. So hopefully you guys can see that clearly. All right, going back in with my Wayne Goss number 19 brush, I'm just going to blur any edges that we have here and make sure there's still some depth in the outer corner. Now with my Chikuhodo GSN 9 brush, I'm going into Cosmic Bloom, and I'm gonna put this on the inner third. This is a really pretty shade. I feel like in general in this palette, there are a lot of these pretty high impact shades actually. So again, one of my criticisms of this palette when I first saw it is that it looked really boring in comparison to the palette I was envisioning in my head. But actually, now that I'm playing around with it, I would definitely say she put in a lot more high impact shadows into this palette than she typically does. So usually for these two shades, it would be much more of just like a smooth metallic without that much shine. But these seem like they have a decent amount of shine to them. So far, it's definitely a very cohesive look. So not the rainbow wonderland that I was envisioning. Now for the lower lash line, I'm gonna go with my soft definer into Shockwave and just carefully brush this throughout the lower lash line area. I want to bring some of that pop of coral down here. So now I'm going to take my soft definer brush into Extreme Plum Noir, and I'm just going to use this to define the outer corners. And yes, I actually already put some of this on my lower lash line, but my camera overheated, so here we are doing that again. And now with my Sonia G Builder, I'm going to go into this bronze shade over here and just sweep this along the lower lash line. This is such an impressively creamy metallic shade. I mean, Pat McGrath's metallics are usually creamy, but I feel like this one is almost unusually so. And then with that same brush, I'm going into Astral Amethyst Moon. And tomorrow I'll be doing a video with these shades Wet, and I'm gonna really feature this shade super prominently in that video. So don't worry, it won't just be on the lower lash line. But today, since we're doing the shades dry, I wanted to show off that multi-chrome a little bit more. But this is a very fun shade. I really love that purpley blue. So now I'm gonna go into Astral Venusian Orchid and just tap my finger into that because this is a very high shine shade. And I'm just gonna scatter this along the inner 2/3 of my eyes. I don't wanna totally cover up the multi-chrome, but I do wanna add a bit more sparkle to this look. Wow, this is such a fun shade. Oh my gosh. It's funny because in pan, I feel like this shade doesn't really come across as being that high impact, but this might be my favorite shade in this entire palette. I mean, to be fair, I feel like I don't see much of the purple now, but still really pretty. I would love to apply this just all over the lid with some mixing liquid. I think that would be gorgeous. Now with my Rephr number 3, I'm gonna go into this chunky bronze shade and just lightly tap this into the inner corners. This is a really pretty shade, but definitely the most boring in comparison to the other shades, because Pat McGrath basically has a shade like this in every one of her palettes. Now with my Sonia G Mini Booster, I'm gonna go into the Skin Show shade and brush this along my brow bone. Oh wow, that is pretty high shine. I feel like this is applying much more easily and much more smoothly than her typical Skin Show shades, which are also beautiful, but I think this one is potentially a new formulation. It's definitely a lot more creamy than her typical shades. And then I'm just gonna also dab some of that on the inner corners because I just wanna blend out a little bit the bronze shade. And now before we go into eyeliner, I also wanna try some of these shades on my cheeks. So I have here my Sonia G cheek brush, and I'm gonna go into Shockwave and just lightly dab some of this on my cheeks. Whoa, okay, that is a really vibrant blush. So I already have her Divine Rose blush down from her Divine Blush collection, so that's this shade over here. But I think this one is definitely strong enough to stand on its own and command attention. This is so pretty though. It's blending in so effortlessly, even though it's a highly pigmented eyeshadow. And that's something I really love about Pat McGrath eyeshadows. You can use them all over your face and not have any issues. So finally, with my Wayne Goss Artist Small, I'm gonna go into the Skin Show shade and just run this along my cheeks. Wow. Okay, I definitely think this is a new formulation for her Skin Show shades. I'll do swatch comparisons tomorrow so you guys can see for yourselves, but at least just based on my initial impression today, I feel like this has much more of a smooth, almost creamy liquid type of consistency instead of just a normal powder. Look at that shine. So here we have the completed look with eyeliner. And on my lips, I have the Divine Rose lip gloss from Pat McGrath because let's be real, this is Divine Rose 3 in a palette. So as I mentioned at the top, in this video, I won't be doing swatch comparisons because I'm gonna save that for tomorrow's video so that this one does not become a million years long, and also because I need to go to bed soon. But I did wanna just give you guys a quick sneak peek in terms of how this palette looks in comparison to some other palettes. So here we have it in comparison to Divine Rose 1, which is overall a little bit more of a neutral, muted color story. But especially the first quad on the bottom looks quite similar to Divine Rose 1 in color story. And then here we have it next to Divine Rose 2. I would say the second and third quads from the bottom look the most similar to Divine Rose 2. If you took out the purpley shades in Huetopian Dream and took out Rose Seduction in Divine Rose 2, these two palettes would look quite similar. And here we have it next to Fleur Fantasia, which is one of Pat McGrath's quads. And I originally thought that these two would be extremely similar because the yellow shade in Fleur Fantasia is called Huetopia. So of course this one, being Huetopian Dream, seemed like it would basically be a larger version of Fleur Fantasia. I would say there's definitely a lot of similarities in these two color stories, but Fleur Fantasia is much more on the pastel side in comparison to Huetopian Dream. And then finally, I also just wanted to show it next to the ColourPop Sailor Moon palette. So Pat McGrath did use Sailor Moon in her promos for this. And you can see these are generally somewhat similar in color story. And so tomorrow I'll do some swatch comparisons in case you guys want a much more affordable dupe for this color story. So now for my overall thoughts and first impressions of this palette. So first off, let me just say I'm glad I did my little rant before I put these shades on my lids because I have really fallen hard for this palette based on this initial impression. So my Divine Rose palettes are definitely getting a run for their money. This might be my new favorite Pat McGrath palette, which I'm not gonna say now because this could definitely change. Like, this is just my first look using this palette, but I do really, really love these tones. Similar to the Divine Rose palettes, it has a lot of these everyday shades that are very comfortable and easy to use, but the Blitz Astrals here are just so unique and beautiful. So excluding this guy, of course, this guy is not unique at all, but these other three are so incredibly impressive. And this one especially has been really a surprise winner for me. There's just so much color and dimension that you can get from these three over here. So these two shades here bring in a little bit of a green flip to them, which adds a really interesting dimension to this palette. And then of course this one brings in that blue and that purple. So I feel like playing around with these, you can really combine them with any other palette and make a really high impact look. Also, normally I find her metallics over here to be fine, but not super interesting. I really enjoyed these two though. I feel like they were exceptionally creamy and easy to apply, especially this one over here. And also these are more so in tones that I would reach for. I find with a lot of her other metallic shades, they're just your very standard bronze or golden shades. And so they're not shades that I typically reach for that often. But this one just has a little bit of that burgundy rose to it, and this one has that kind of copper pink to it, which make them appeal a lot more to me personally. Also, these three mattes are just so fast and easy to use. I feel like today's eyeshadow look was one of the fastest that I've put together in recent history, which is saying a lot because recently I've been picking up a lot of Pat McGrath and Natasha Denona palettes. I'm also surprisingly impressed with the Skin Show shade. I mean, swatching it, I was like, this was a pretty boring shade, but applying it to the lids, I do feel like there's some extra creaminess to this shade. So I feel like in terms of formulation, she did an amazing job with all of these shades. These are either all on par with her previous formulas or even a step better. And I think other folks have commented on this, but Blitz Sextreme is actually more of a pressed pigment in a pan rather than her baked formula like these. And while that might be slightly disappointing from an aesthetic perspective, this is very, very creamy. And I think it is much more opaque in comparison to Sextraterrestrial. So overall, this palette is such a slam dunk for me. So I feel like my feelings of this palette started way up here, went all the way down, and now are back up. As I mentioned before, I thought this was gonna be my perfect Pat McGrath palette based on the teasers. I thought there was gonna be a lot of pastels, multi-chromes, shimmery, sparkling shades, and I was really disappointed when I first saw the images of this palette. But now that I've picked it up, tried it on my lids, I actually think this is my perfect palette in certain ways, just not the way I expected. This palette just really appeals to the little girl in me who was completely obsessed with Sailor Moon growing up and just loves these sorts of pinky purpley shades. I would say other than these two at the bottom, the rest of the shades are definitely dupable in my Pat McGrath collection and also in my other eyeshadows. So I'm really looking forward to doing comparison swatches tomorrow because I think I can find a decent number of dupes or at least close dupes. But that said, this is like the curation of all of my favorite shades in one. So from that perspective, I can't really be mad at it. I would say that if you don't have any Mothership palettes and this color story appeals to you, I would highly, highly recommend picking it up. I mean, maybe wait until she has a 30% off sale, but definitely this palette is impeccable in terms of quality and is, in my opinion, one of the best that she's come out with. If you already have a lot of Pat McGrath palettes, I would say it really just kind of comes down to how much do you like these shades at the bottom. If you're like me and you're obsessed with Pat McGrath palettes, and at this point you've resigned yourself to having a ton of repeats, so like every single gold, every single bronze in her palettes is generally not that different. If you're okay with that, then I think that this is still a good buy. If you have both Divine Rose and Divine 2 and you are okay with having their baby in your collection, then I think this is good from that perspective. If you feel like you don't really want to have a lot of redundancies in your collection, then I would recommend just trying to maybe go look for some indie brands and get shades that look similar to these two at the bottom. I'm sure you can find something on Cleona or Terra Moons or Divina that's in that sort of general category. For me personally though, I am so excited about this palette and can't wait to do a ton more looks with this, especially with mixing liquid, because as you saw today, I think all of these 6 shades plus this guy over here apply beautifully just with a brush, a finger. There's really nothing lacking at all with applying them dry. But I do think these 3 over here will benefit a lot from mixing liquid. So I'm gonna test that out in tomorrow's video. So that's it for today's video. If you guys like this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Also, let me know down below if you guys are picking up this palette, waiting until it goes on sale, or just passing on it. I'd be really interested in hearing your guys' thoughts. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!